Marine Rescue Central Coast, Marine Rescue Central Coast, Marine Rescue Central Coast. CC-130, procedural radio check. Gosford Main boat ramp, over.
CC-130, CC-130, this is Marine Rescue Central Coast.
Marine Rescue Central Coast. I did receive you. It was not the clearest I've ever had, but CC-130 will follow the app procedures. CC-130 out. Well, that wasn't very clear, was it, viewers? From Central Coast Rescue, thank you for joining me this morning. Rip off there. Well, thank you for joining me this morning. One of the problems of a reprobate mind is its inconsistency. Its ability to chatter and natter, but its inconsistency to produce anything that holds lasting integrity. Integrity in a relationship is one of the key fibers to its success, and the reprobate mind will undermine that. As the board goes in, we will set our paddle and we will set our watch at 6:02. The reprobate mind has all the fancy things to say, but never backs it up over a long period of time. You'll find that the reprobates are usually the ones that are having the drug and alcohol problems, their nicotine problems. They struggle with resolve and the like. We're away. Are we on? Yeah, we're on. The reprobate mind usually is associated with narcissism and psychopathy, all these dark triad characteristic traits. The reprobate mind is at the mercy of the carnal nature and all its instinctual problems, conceitedness, revelries, drunkenness, sorcery, witchcraft. Witchcraft's when you deeply manipulate somebody right down to so much as the smiting of the eyes. You'll hear of narcissists smiting people with their eyes. Orgies. Their life usually evolves around sex, careless and reckless sex, and the consequences thereof because of the drugs and alcohol and other mind-altering substances which play into the acceleration of the sex drive. So these people will take opportunity for sex. They don't really have any standards. That's the problem. They don't know how to set boundaries up. It's all run emotionally. And this is why they turn again to their alcohol or drugs, because everything's high potent emotion, and these emotions stagger. Some of these people have done these behaviors for decades. Their bodies, the way they've treated their bodies is less than admirable or commendable. As they age, they get used to the symptoms and the side effects of their lifestyle, mentally and emotionally, physically, spiritually. They become spiritually warped. They have delusions. They end up in derision a lot of the time. They live in little tribal, dysfunctional tribal groups where you'll have the bludgers and the supplier. And the supplier usually is the adult, while the dysfunctional children prey on her or him. In some cases it's actually the children, where the children will prey, where the adult will prey on the income of the children and rely on them to provide for them and supply life for them. This then makes a tribal environment, and within this environment it becomes very exclusive. But very entertaining as well. I've seen these groups where they live within their dysfunction, grooming each other emotionally, manipulating each other emotionally, running on emotional sensations without any stability at all. One day to the next, after the next, after the next. They become very confused and infantile. They live their life around the substances and the emotional looping. The emotions are tried to be kept in check by the drugs, but their lifestyle betrays that. They don't keep relationships because their luredness takes them into relationships that they ought not to be in and undermines the relationship opportunities that they have. They don't perform at a level in a relationship that you would call acceptable. They try and hide under the radar if they meet somebody with some substance that they like, that's supplying them what they need by way of their sinful nature, usually sex, money, a contribution to the drug habits, which will be rewarded by sex. And they'll stay in that relationship for as long as they can until somebody gives in or crashes psychologically. Usually the partner of this person, if they're not as emotionally infantile as the person that you're dealing with, from within the emotionally dysfunctional family. They will have partners, but usually the partners are coerced by the supply of drugs to hang around and the sex. This fad, this allurement doesn't take long to wear off, as the outsiders see the inner circle in conflict and derision at different times if money becomes a little bit thin on it, and the supply looks like it might be threatened. There's a panic usually around that, because the whole cycle of life for these people evolves around the drug or the alcohol. That's how it works. When the partner sees that the structure of the family is really just a day-by-day typical purpose to be stoned again, be pissed again, take more pills, have some sex, whinge to each other, be the therapy to one another, and the therapy you wouldn't pay for, because again it's just built on emotional grooming. I'll say what you want to hear and make you feel as best I can how you want to feel, and that is the way in which they try and heal each other. But it doesn't deal with the undercurrent of issues that need to be faced, and these people have standoffs with one another if anybody edges towards what might need to be addressed. If you're an outsider and you suggest that there's a few things that you've seen that might need to be improved for the relationship, at first they'll mirror what you say and try and fix what you're asking for. And when the flying monkeys, gremlins, or minions, or whatever you want to call them, get wind that one or the other of the family members is attempting to improve, there's, again, as I said before, derision. It brings a high sense of confusion, because the domestic culture, the way in which they're formed and the way in which they give therapy to one another, doesn't like members of the group improving. They have to stay at a certain sub-level, infantile level in their mind and mindset, so that they're enslaved to the sinful way in which they live. They're shackled, they're bound and fettered to the grooming of the desires, the lustful desires that flow out of and come from the sinful human nature. And there's our friend the bird. When one of the family members, be it an adult child who may have met a partner that's showing stability and that they're interested in, and that they're prepared to challenge the domestic structure, drug and emotional infantile structure of the family or tribe, whatever you want to call it. I call it tribe because a lot of this is tribal. It's not your Western family type of mum, dad and the kids type structure. This is a structure where there's no boundaries. The child, adult child, has learnt that there's no boundaries. And boundaries really are the subset that gives structure to purpose, limits, where you can exceed those limits in a positive way, discipline without becoming abusive. These are all the things that boundaries are really important for. not to take drugs just for recreational, selfish, weak purposes. I'm going to give you a really good view of this flower. Look at that, viewers. Boundaries enable us to be very careful about what partners we pick. Boundaries enable us to understand that running on the sinful nature and the casual sex and ruining our relationships is not beneficial for anybody. And we have a value for things that are healthy, what to eat, when not to eat, not to be a glutton, not to be fat, to exercise, boundaries around unhealthiness that keep unhealthiness out and psychological abuse out. These kind of boundaries, they all work. I'm just gonna sort them out. Here we go. That's better. Boundaries which help us to maintain our persona in a way in which we're thinking about moving forward and just not going with the flow. A lot of these people work just to get food, rent and drug money. As they age, they often have personal series of emotional semi-breakdown by way of regret as their mind starts to deteriorate and fragment. They have personal crisis periods where they seek for a way of restoration, but because of their narcissism, they just fall back into their destructive habits, making promises to themselves that they're just unable to keep because the way in which their patterns of behavior have been formed over years is just too hard for them to break now, and they surrender to the fact that harming themselves psychologically and physically is their lot in life. These people are very toxic when they're manic, and they're very seclusive when they're depressive. They will become very dependent in a dysfunctional way on the family members that have bought and fed into the idea that drugs and alcohol and these substance idealisms, well, they're not idealisms, they're actually living them, but the idealism around it, what the rewards are, which the only rewards are destruction. When they realize that the way they perceived life and the way in which they went about it by hurting and harming themselves through the abuse and use of the chemicals, they know what they begin to realize, that the damage that they've done to their mind and their body is irreversible. Is absolutely irreversible. This causes a sense of panic, at which point they'll try and find somebody outside the tribe, and this is the aging narcissist or the aging person that's made the wrong decisions. They'll start to become predatorial and try and find somebody that has made some decisions that worked, that enabled them to have something to show for themselves, because these people end up with nothing to show for themselves except a long history, which no one will ever know about, of deep drug use and abuse as we turn to the sun, that never benefited them or anybody else, because their lifestyle choices were not based on wisdom at all. Thinking they were wise in their tribe, that the tribal rules and laws were wise, they were actually fools and were given over to a reprobate mind, because that's what foolishness does. It hands you over to a reprobate mind. And there's nothing you can do to change that and stop that if you're not aware of that's the way you're living. Because the reprobate mind has no end. It's something that cannot be rehabilitated. It will take you all the way to the chambers of death, the Bible says. Down the river of death. It'll float you down the river of death, and you won't even know. That's the power of the deceitfulness and influence of the reprobate mind. You add drugs and alcohol, sexual misconduct, and all the addictions that the reprobate mind uses for the person to stay in that state. And this is part of the reason why many of these people do not find their way out. They just do not find their way back out. They start to blame, the younger ones will blame the older ones and tell them that their customs were wrong. They do, many of them estrange the parents. Once they realize that they're being duped, the parents are estranged. There's anxiety and depression to boot because of the panic. These people now have reached a stage in life where there's no return and no possibility of producing anything in life that's going to be something they can look back on and say, yeah, I made the right decisions. They become reclusive and hermit-like. They only come out if they haven't got a partner and they are desperate for some kind of femininity boost or masculinity boost, depending on what the sex is that the person needs. A lot of these people are bisexual to give them more option of supply, and this is usually a byproduct of the alcohol and drug abuse, the sexual depravity, which comes out of the reprobate mind. I was out last night with one of my friends that we go way back to the start. And one of his great victories in life, and he was very happy with himself, was that many years ago he got out of the drug culture. And we talk about this a lot because we saw as young men where it led, what it did, how it failed, and where people end up. He managed to turn his life around and get property. He's got a stable relationship. He's raising his son, who's very charismatic and talented. But he escaped the power and the influence and the internal indoctrination of the reprobate mind. Because once our carnal nature, our reprobate mind, gets its claws into our thinking, it's a cave where all the footsteps lead in and none lead out. And for those that find their way out, the urgency and the desperateness and the message they have against alcohol and drugs comes with a passion that you don't find in the normal educated psychologist or psychiatrist that hasn't gone into that cave. These people come running out of the reprobation. They come running out of that cave and they've seen the monster, they've seen the horror, and they have no reservation about making it very, very clear that drugs and alcohol and medication abuse, recreational drug abuse, does not work. And it's wonderful when somebody's had a revelation that strong and has come to the place where they realize that we have been given an opportunity to be gifted with what God's given us in the light without corrupting it or destroying it and vandalizing it with reprobate living, with sinful living, because a lot of these people are dead in their sins and they're awakening to their godlikeness and they're going, no, I don't want to waste any more time or harm myself or the people around me anymore. And this causes a panic. This ambushes, psychologically ambushes and vandalizes the mindset of the rest of the tribe, because when somebody in a tribe looks like they're going to break free of it and become what they're supposed to be and find their way out of the reprobate living, it comes with a lot of opposition, because the reprobates don't want to be left on their own. And the people that are seeing the light, this goes with cults as well. It's a form of shunning. It's a form of shunning, fear. Shunning has to do with fear. It's not necessarily while it's a punishment, it has to do with a fear of breaking away from the established culture to go on to have a better life, a wiser life. And the foolish, when they see this happen to one of their members, one of their cult members or a family member, that something's happened to this person and they're going on to bigger and better things, that causes a panic and an internal psychological derision inside the others that causes them to shrink back like a vampire from the light, back into the shadows. And the person trying to find the light, the family member coming into the light, often ends up shunned or alienated. That's how it works, at least in the start. The shock of it, the shock that you're saying the way we are doesn't work. In a lot of cases it can be either the adult or the child, but if it's the adult who's the supplier and has led them down this path, the other, their children, their grown children, these children will estrange their parents by way of resentment and bitterness and but a sense of betrayal. Some of these children will murder the parent just out of the anger and the ferocity of the sense of abandonment, the abandonment of being left in a deep domestic formation of reprobation, dysfunction. My daughter's a policewoman. Here's an example, a reverse example, where the child killed the father. They got to the house. The father was in a pool of blood, bludgeoned to death. The partner of my daughter took attention to the father to see if there was life. My daughter began an search of the premises for other people, where she ran into the son, a meth addict, who had gone into a rage and beaten his father to death. Probably didn't get his way, right? If these people don't get their way over a length of time, and they psychologically collapse and go manic, they do have the capability of turning on the people that are closest to them, and murdering them. She, and I don't know how she done this, because there's not much of her, she apprehended this guy in the backyard. She could have been killed. Handcuffed him, and the rest of the police turned up and they arrested him, and she's going to get an award for her work, risking a life. The father was dead. Drug related. I'm sure if we got right into the psychology of what drove him to killing his father, it might have something to do with the way in which he treated the mother and broke up the family. He might not have been able to give the addict any more money. A lot of these young adults will siphon their parents into financial debit. They end up in debt. They lose their assets to supply the habits of their children. And the reason for this is, and this is what a lot of people overlook, they've allowed it. And we come back to boundaries. What you don't put boundaries around, you are an accessory to the fact. If it's your authority to put those boundaries up and you don't, you're an accessory to the fact of the way in which that person turns out. There is all different kinds and levels of how people end up. Some people are never ever going to be right. In the case of Ted Bundy, not many people realize this, the great serial killer. They really don't know how many people he killed or what age he started. He could have started as young as 14, where a girl just around the corner went missing, and Ted was the paper boy. They just never got to the bottom of that one. But what happened was, when Mrs. Bundy, the mother, conceived Ted, the man that she conceived Ted with, because he wasn't raised by his natural father, he was raised by a stepfather, and the stepfather's name was Bundy. That's how he got the name Ted Bundy, Edward Bundy, or whatever his name was. But when Ted was conceived by his father, the mother went to get an abortion and took all the tablets and medications to eliminate the fetus, the conceived egg. But it didn't eliminate. The pregnancy went through. And just somehow or some way, we'll never know. But possibly did that have something to do with the way in which Ted Bundy turned out, on top of the fact that he had his mother all to himself as a young boy, until she met a cook in the army or the navy or something of this nature, Mr. Bundy, who became his stepfather, and the mother went on to have 3 or 4 children to him. So Ted was no longer able to have his mother all to himself. He had to share. And one of his nephews speaks of how he used to take him away, and it was some of the best times in his life. only for them to find out later that uncle was a serial killer. So there's many ways in which drug altering behaviors, mind altering behaviors from drugs, can turn people into criminals, into psychopaths, into narcissists. And they take it out on strangers. This is why if you get into a relationship with a parent or an adult child that it has emotional incest functioning in the construct, the domestic construct, you will be psychologically punished, because they'll siphon your sexual supply out of you, and the emotional contribution to that, emotional follow-up to that, is absent, and that causes a tremendous void in the mind and heart of the person that's involved with one of these people, because their emotional output that's meant to be in the intimate relationship is bound up and fettered to the tribal loyalty. So really, they've always got this sense of rebelling against the family or the tribe by going and having sex with somebody outside of it, but emotionally, by way of guilt, possibly a sense of shame, and a sense that they've betrayed the emotional construct of that group, they retract back and they begin to invest the emotional, well, which they've done this all along, but they invest the emotional contribution that should have went to the person they had sex with back in to the emotional domestic bank, and the person on the outside ends up feeling empty. They start to suffer trauma. They're actually just being used, and it is a very hard thing to spot. I hope this has helped you this morning. I'm Rev Dr. J.W. Morrison, theologist, Central Coast, New South Wales, Australia. If you're going through a breakup or some kind of trauma of this nature, I do, in the name of Jesus, I pray for you, and I can relate to you. I'm over 3 months in now. Yes, I'm starting to come out the other side, the worst of it. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. There's nothing you can do. All the knowledge on earth and everything else put together ain't going to help you from the consequences of this. It's just a process that you have to go through. There's nothing you can do to change it. It's just not possible. That's the way we're made up. How you going, mate? You got the boy out? Good on you, mate. You'll get Father of the Year from me. Hey? Yeah. Oh, that's another one. Oh, there's a couple of guys, father and son, that come out. Yeah. It's good to see the fathers coming back to bringing some masculinity to the kids. Oh, mate, you know what? I'll tell you something. 50 years ago, my granddad and I fished along these rocks up there, Yeah, 50 years ago. And I look back and I'm so grateful for the way he got me out and about. But look, yeah, but today it's hard. They've got so many other options. Oh, that, you know, this is the thing. This is the sad part, isn't it? But you're out. They come back to it. There's a few floodies around and somebody got a big salmon yesterday too. I'll see you after. You too, mate. It's a beautiful day. Yeah. No, I don't want to play into, and I don't play into anymore, the dysfunction of people that want to live in their sinful nature, try and fool you into thinking that they're wise, but they're just living covertly in their reprobate mind. And they know better. They know what's right and what's wrong, but their addictions and the dopamine and oxytocin and things that they get from the drama of that is just too much for them to let go of. I've met some beautiful, wonderful women that have been in this condition, and sorry guys, that's the radio. I do know from experience that they end up not being healthy people to be around because they can't keep on the mask. They can't keep, it's only blue tacked on, if you know what I mean, and the blue tack wears out and the mask slips off and you are confronted with the real person. And sometimes that's just too hard if you're doing all the work within yourself to not have a reprobate mind. I pray for you all. I do encourage you very sternly to continue to seek wisdom, or start seeking wisdom. Learn about the carnal nature. You can start in Romans 7, from verses 4 onwards, where it will show you about the religious way in which evil and psychopathy and narcissism can manifest from approaching God the wrong way. I'm Rev Dr. J.W. Morrison here at Gosford on the Central Coast, New South Wales, Australia. Thank you for joining me, and bye for now.